The bell. In the evening, at sunset, when golden clouds could just be seen among the chimney tops, a curious sound would be heard, first by one person, then by another. It was like a church bell, but it only lasted for a moment, because of the noise of carts and the street cries. There is the evening bell, people would say. The sun is setting. Those who went outside the town, where the houses were more scattered, each with its garden or little meadow, saw the evening star and heard the tones of the bell much better. It seemed as if the sound came from a church buried in silent, fragrant woods, and people looked that way, feeling quite peaceful. Time passed, and still people said one to the other, "Can there be a church in the woods? That bell has such a wonderfully sweet sound. Shall we go and look at it closer?" The rich people drove and the poor ones walked, but it was a very long way. When they reached a group of willows which grew on the edge of the wood, they sat down and looked up among the long branches, thinking that they were really in the heart of the forest. A candy man from the town came out and pitched a tent there, and then another candy man, and he hung a bell up over his tent. The bell was tarred so as to stand the rain, and it had no clapper. When people went home again, they said that it had been so pretty, and that meant something more than mere tea. 3 people said that they had walked right through the forest to the other side, and that they heard the same curious bell all the time, but that it sounded as if it had come from the town. One of them wrote a poem about it, and said that it sounded like a mother's voice to a beloved child. No melody could be sweeter than the chimes of this bell. The emperor was told about it, and he promised that anyone who really found where the sound came from should have the title of the world's bell ringer, even if there were no bell at all. A great many went to the woods to earn an honest penny, but only one of them brought home any kind of news. No one had been far enough, not even he himself, but he said that the sound of the bell came from a very big owl in a hollow tree. It was a wise owl, which kept on beating its head against a tree, but whether the sound came from its head or from the hollow tree, he could not say. All the same, he was appointed world's bell ringer, and every year he wrote a little paper about the owl, but nobody was much the wiser for it. Now, on a Sunday, the priest had preached a very moving sermon. All the young people had been much touched by it. It was a beautiful sunny day, and after church the young people walked out of the town, and they heard the sound of the unknown bell more than usually loud, coming from the wood. On hearing it, they all felt anxious to go further and see it, all but 3. The first of these had to go home to try on her ball dress. The second was a poor boy who had borrowed his coat and boots of the landlord's son, and he had to carry them back before night. The third said that he had never been anywhere without his mother, that he had always been a good child, and he meant to keep on so. So these three did not go. The others trudged off. The sun shone and the birds sang, and the young people took each other by the hand and sang with them. Soon 2 of the smallest ones got tired, and they went back to town. 2 little girls sat down and made wreaths, so they did not go either. When the others got to the willows where the candy men had their tents, they said, "Now then, here we are. There is not any bell. It is only something people imagine." Just then a bell was heard in the wood, with its deep, rich notes, and 4 or 5 of them decided after all to go further into the wood. The underwood was so thick and close that it was quite hard to walk. The bushes grew almost too high, and brambles hung in long garlands from tree to tree, where the nightingales sang and the sunbeams played. It was lovely and peaceful, but there was no path for the girls. The clothes would have been torn to shreds. There were great boulders overgrown with many-colored mosses, and fresh springs trickled among them with a curious little gurgling sound. "Surely that cannot be the bell," said one of the young people, as he lay down to listen. "I must look into this." So he stayed behind and let the others go on. They came to a little hut made of bark and branches, overhung by a crab-apple tree, as if it wanted to shake all its bloom over the road, which was covered with roses. The long sprays clustered round the gable, and on it hung a little bell. Could this be the one they sought? Yes, they were all agreed that it must be, except one. He said it was far too small and delicate to be heard so far away as they had heard it, and that the tones which moved all hearts were quite different than these. He who spoke was a king's son, and so the others said, "That kind of fellow must always be wiser than anyone else." So they let him go on alone, and as he went, he still heard the little bell with which the others were so pleased. And now and then, when the wind came from the direction of the candy men, he could hear the children calling for tea. But the deep-toned bell sounded above them all, and it seemed as if there was an organ playing with it, and the sounds came from the left, where the heart is placed. There was a rustling among the bushes, and a little boy stood before the king's son. He had wooden shoes on, and such a small jacket that the sleeves did not cover his wrists. They knew each other, for he was the boy who had to go back with the coat and the boots to the landlord's son. He had done this, changed back into his shabby clothes and wooden shoes, and then, drawn by the deep notes of the bell, had come to the wood again. "Then we can go together," said the king's son. But the poor boy in the wooden shoes was too bashful. He pulled down his short sleeves and said he was afraid he could not walk quickly enough. Besides which, he thought the bell ought to be looked for on the right, because that side looked the most beautiful. "Then we shan't meet at all," said the king's son, nodding to the poor boy, who went into the thickest and darkest part of the wood, where the thorns torn his shabby clothes and scratched his face, hands and feet until they bled. The king's son got some good scratches too, but he at least had had the sun shining upon his path. "We are going to follow him, for he is a bright fellow." "I must and will find the bell," said he, "if I have to go to the end of the world." There were some horrid monkeys that sat up in the trees, grinning and showing their teeth. "Shall we throw nuts at him?" said they. "Shall we thrash him? He is a king's son." But he went bravely on and further into the wood, where the most beautiful flowers grew. There were white star-like lilies with red hearts, pale blue tulips which glistened in the sun, and apple trees on which the apples looked like great shining soap bubbles. You may fancy how these trees glittered in the sun. Round about were beautiful green meadows, where deer played under the spreading oaks and beeches. There were also great quiet lakes, where white swans swam about, flapping their wings. The king's son often stopped and listened, for he sometimes fancied that the bell sounded from one of these lakes. But then again he felt sure that it was not there, but further in the wood. Now the sun began to go down, and the clouds were fiery red. A great stillness came over the wood, and he sank upon his knees, sang his evening song, and said, "Never shall I find what I seek. Now the sun is going down, the night is coming on, the dark night. Perhaps I could catch one more glimpse of the round, red sun before it sinks beneath the earth. I will climb up onto those rocks. They are as high as the trees." He seized the roots and creepers and climbed up the slippery stones where the water snakes wriggled and the toads seemed to croak at him. But he got to the top before the sun disappeared. Seen from this height, oh, what splendor lay before him. The ocean, the wide, beautiful ocean, its long waves rolling towards the shore. The sun still stood like a great shining altar, out there where sea and sky met. Everything melted away into glowing colors. The wood sang, the ocean sang, and his heart sang with them. All nature was like a great holy church, where trees and floating clouds were the pillars, flowers and grass the woven carpet, and the heaven itself a great dome. The red colors faded as the sun went down, but millions of stars peeped out. They were like many diamond lamps, and the king's son spread out his arms towards heaven, sea, and wood. At that moment, from the right-hand path came the poor boy with the short sleeves and wooden shoes. He had reached the same goal just as soon by his own road. They ran towards each other and clasped each other's hands in the great church, and above them sounded the unseen holy bell. The Nightingale. Many years ago, there was an emperor in China who lived in a splendid palace. He was very proud of his palace and was greatly pleased when travelers came from all over the world to see it. These travelers wrote many books about it, but they also wrote about a nightingale which sang beautifully in the forest nearby. The emperor had never heard of the nightingale till he read about it in a book. Then he called his servants. "Why has no one ever told me about this wonderful singing bird?" he said. "Bring it to me, and let the bird sing for me this evening." But his men had never seen the bird, and no one in the court knew anything about it. At last, in the kitchen, they came upon a poor little girl, one of the lowest of the cooks, who said, "Oh dear me, yes, I know the nightingale well. Oh, how she sings. The poor fishermen know her well, and every night when I'm going through the forest to my mother's home, it sings for me very sweetly." Gladly the girl offered to take the king's servants to the forest, and hardly had they entered the woods when the nightingale began to sing. The men listened in wonder. Never before had they heard such music. "Little nightingale," the girl cried out, quite loud, "our most gracious emperor wishes so much that you sing for him." "With the greatest pleasure," answered the nightingale. So saying, the bird flew in front of them, and they all went back to the palace. The whole court was present, and even the little kitchen maid was permitted to stand by the emperor's chair. Then the nightingale hopped merrily upon a golden perch and began to sing. It sang so sweetly that great tears came into the emperor's eyes. "Stay with us, little nightingale," he cried, "and you shall have everything you wish." "I will stay," said the nightingale, "but I am paid enough. I have seen tears in the emperor's eyes." So it came to pass that the nightingale had a splendid cage and was given everything that she wished. One day came a package marked "The Nightingale," and when they opened it, they found a clockwork bird covered with diamonds and precious stones. When it was wound up, it sang just like the real bird. Round its neck was a ribbon on which was written, "From the Emperor of Japan to the Emperor of China." "Oh, this is splendid," cried the ladies and gentlemen of the court. Even the emperor was delighted, and again the clockwork nightingale sang. The real nightingale stole away to the forest again, and you may imagine how glad the woodcutters and fishermen were when they heard the sweet song once more. 5 years passed away, when the whole land was thrown into deep grief by the emperor's sickness, and the doctors said he was close to death. As they leaned over the dying emperor, they heard him whisper, "Music, music, make the clockwork bird sing." But alas, something had gone wrong with the works of the clockwork bird, and no one could fix it. No one could make it sing. Then, when it seemed as if nothing could be done, there sounded the most delightful song. It was the little nightingale. She had heard of the emperor's distress and had come to cheer him. As she sang, he felt his strength coming back, and clasping his hands together, he said, "O nightingale, come back to us. I will break the clockwork bird in pieces." "No, you must not do that," said the nightingale. "The poor little make-believe bird did as well as it could, so don't punish it." "And will you come back to your cage?" asked the emperor. "No," said the nightingale. "I must share my song with the poor woodcutters and the fishermen. But I will come every night and sing you one song, and you will grow strong and well. Now go to sleep and wake refreshed." The emperor fell into a deep sleep, so that his attendants thought he had indeed passed away. But in the morning he opened his eyes and looked around at the sorrowful people and said, "Good morning." And then what a great rejoicing there was in the land, for the emperor was well and strong again, and every night the windows of the palace were thrown open wide to hear the lovely song of the nightingale. The flax. The flax was in full bloom. It had pretty little blue flowers, as delicate as the wings of a moth, or even more so. The sun shone, and the showers watered it, and this was just as good for the flax as it is for little children to be washed and then kissed by their mother. They look much prettier for it, and so did the flax. "People say that I look very well," said the flax, "and that I am so fine and long that I shall make a beautiful piece of linen. How fortunate I am. It makes me so happy. It's such a pleasant thing to know that something can be made of me. How the sunshine cheers me, and how sweet and refreshing is the rain. I am so happy. No one in the world can feel happier than I am." "Ah, yes, no doubt," said the fern, "but you do not know the world yet as well as I do. For my sticks are knotted." And then it sung quite mournfully, "The song is ended." "No, it is not ended," said the flax. "Tomorrow the sun will shine, or the rain fall. I feel that I am growing. I feel that I am in full blossom. I am the happiest of all creatures." Well, one day some people came who took hold of the flax and pulled it up by the roots. This was painful. Then it was laid in water as if they meant to drown it, and after that placed near a fire as if it were to be roasted. All this was very shocking. "We cannot expect to be happy always," said the flax. "By feeling pain as well as good, we become wise." And certainly there was plenty of evil in store for the flax. It was steeped and roasted and broken and combed. Indeed, it scarcely knew what was done to it. At last it was put on the spinning wheel. Whir, whir, went the wheel, so fast that the flax could not think. "Well, I have been very happy," he thought, in the midst of his pain, "and I must be contented with the past." And contented he was, till he was put on the loom and became a beautiful piece of white linen. All the flax, even to the last stalk, was used in making this one piece. Well, this is quite wonderful. I could not have believed that I should be so fortunate. The fern really was not wrong with its story of snip, snap, snore. But the song is not ended yet, I'm sure. It is only just beginning. How wonderful it is that after all I've suffered, I'm made something of at last. I am the luckiest person in the world, so strong and fine, and how white, and what a length. This is something different from being a mere plant and bearing flowers. Then I had no attention, nor any water unless it rained. Now I am watched and taken care of. Every morning the maid turns me over, and I have a shower bath from the watering pot every evening. Yes, and the clergyman's wife noticed me and said I was the best piece of linen in the whole parish. I cannot be happier than I am now. After some time, the linen was taken into the house, placed under the scissors, and cut and torn into pieces, and then pricked with needles. This certainly was not pleasant, but at least it was made into 12 garments of that kind which people do not like to name, and yet everybody should wear one. See, now then, said the flax, I have become something of importance. This was the plan for me. It is quite a blessing. Now I shall be of some use in the world, as everyone ought to be. It is the only way to be happy. I am now divided into 12 pieces, and yet we are all one and the same in the whole dozen. It is such good fortune. Years passed away, and at last the linen was so worn it could scarcely hold together. It must end very soon, said the pieces to each other. We would gladly have held together a little longer, but we must not expect what cannot be. And at length they fell into rags and tatters, and thought it was all over with them, for they were torn to shreds, steeped in water, and made into a pulp, and dried, and they knew not what besides, till all at once they found themselves beautiful white paper. Well, now this is a surprise, a glorious surprise too, said the paper. I am now finer than ever, and I shall be written upon, and who can tell what fine thing I may have written upon me? This is wonderful luck. And sure enough, the most beautiful stories and poetry were written upon it, and only once was there a blot, which was very fortunate. Then people heard the stories and poetry read, and it made them wiser and better, for all that was written had a good and sensible meaning, and a great blessing was held in the words on this paper. I never imagined anything like this, said the paper, when I was only a little blue flower growing in the fields. How could I fancy that I should ever be the means of bringing knowledge and joy to men? I cannot understand it myself, and yet it really is so. Heaven knows that I have done nothing but what I was obliged to do, and yet I have been given one joy and honor after another. Each time I think that the song is ended, and something higher and better begins for me. I suppose now I shall be sent on my travels around the world, so that people may read me. It must be, for I have more splendid thoughts written upon me than I had a pretty flower in olden times. I am happier than ever. But the paper did not go on its travels. It was sent to the printer, and all the words written upon it were set up in type to make a book, or rather many hundreds of books, for so many more persons could have pleasure and profit from a printed book than from the written paper. And if the paper had been sent about the world, it would have been worn out before it had got halfway through its journey. This is certainly the wisest plan, said the written paper. I really did not think of that. I shall stay at home and be held in honor, like some old grandfather, as I really am to all of these new books. They will do some good. I could not have wandered about as they do. Yet he who wrote all this has looked at me as every word flowed from his pen upon my surface. I am the most honored of all. Then the paper was tied in a bundle with other papers and thrown into a tub that stood in the wash-house. After work, it is well to rest, said the paper, and a very good chance to think. Now, for the first time, I can think of what is in me, and to know oneself is true progress. What will be done with me now, I wonder? No doubt I shall still go forward. I am always going forward, as I know quite well. Now it happened one day that all the paper in the tub was taken out and laid on the hearth to be burned. People said it could not be sold at the shop to wrap up butter and sugar because it had been written upon. The children in the house stood round the stove, for they wanted to see the paper burn, because it flamed up so prettily. And afterwards, among the ashes, so many red sparks could be seen running one after the other, here and there, as quick as the wind. They called it seeing the children come out of school, and the last spark was the schoolmaster. They often thought the last spark had come, and one would cry, "There goes the schoolmaster." But the next moment another spark would appear, shining so beautifully. How they would like to know where all the sparks went to. Perhaps we shall find out some day, but we don't know now. The whole bundle of paper had been placed on the fire, and it was soon lit. "Oh," cried the paper as it burst into a bright flame. "Oh, it was certainly not very pleasant to be burning." But when the whole was wrapped in flames, the flames mounted up into the air, higher than the flax had ever been able to raise its little blue flower, and they glistened as the white linen never could have glistened. All the written letters became quite red in a moment, and all the words and thoughts turned to fire. "Now I am mounting straight up to the sun," said a voice in the flames, and it was as if 1,000 voices echoed the words, and the flames darted up through the chimney and went out at the top. Then a number of tiny beings, as many in number as the flowers on the flax had been, and unseen to mortal eyes, floated above them. They were even lighter and more delicate than the flowers from which they were born, and as the flames went out, and nothing remained of the paper but black ashes, these little beings danced upon it, and whenever they touched it, bright red sparks appeared. "The children are all out of school, and the schoolmaster was the last of all," said the children. "It was good fun, and they sang over the dead ashes." But the little unseen being said, "The song is never ended. The most beautiful is yet to come." But the children could neither hear nor understand this, nor should they, for children must not know everything.